Episode 65, April the 26th, 1915. Heroic Fiasco of Y Beach. Further Dark Hours of the Commander-in-Chief. By General Sir Ian Hamilton, GCB, GCMG DSO. Read by Nick Lucas. Sir Ian Hamilton in this chapter continues his classic description of the British landing on the Gallipoli peninsula. The brightest hopes of the Commander-in-Chief were destined to be rudely disappointed, and on this second day of the adventure he describes the growing anxiety which he felt lest the whole adventure should turn into a complete fiasco. April the 26th, Queen Elizabeth. At 12:05 a.m., I was dragged out of a dead sleep by Braithwaite, General Sir Walter Braithwaite, who kept shaking me by the shoulder and saying, "Sir Ian, Sir Ian, I have been having a good time for an hour far away somewhere, far from the bloody turmoil, and before I quite knew where I was, my Chief of Staff repeated what he had, I think, said several times already. 'Sir Ian, you've got to come right along. A question of life and death. You must settle it.' Braithwaite is a cool hand, but his tone made me wide awake in a second. I sprang from bed, flung on my British warm, and crossed to the Admiral's cabin. Not his own cabin, but the dining saloon, where I found de Robeck himself, Rear Admiral Thursby, in charge of the landing of the Australian-New Zealand Army Corps, Roger Keyes, Braithwaite, Brigadier General Carruthers, DA and QMG to the ANNZ Corps, and Brigadier General Cunliffe Owen, CRA, to the ANNZ Corps. A cold hand clutched my heart as I scanned their faces. Carruthers gave me a message from Birdwood, written in Godley's writing. I read it aloud. Both my divisional generals and brigadiers have represented to me that they fear their men are thoroughly demoralized by shrapnel fire, to which they have been subjected all day, after exhaustion and gallant work in morning. Numbers have dribbled back from the firing line and cannot be collected in this difficult country. Even New Zealand Brigade, which has only recently engaged, lost heavily, and is to some extent demoralized. If troops are subjected to shell fire again tomorrow morning, there is likely to be a fiasco, as I have no fresh troops with which to replace those in firing line. I know my representation is most serious, but if we are to re-embark, it must be at once. Signed, Birdwood." The faces around that table took on a look, and when I closed my eyes, there they sit, a look like nothing on earth, unless it be the guests when their host flings salt upon the burning raisins. To gain time, I asked one or two questions about the tactical position on shore, but Carruthers and Cunliffe Owen seemed unable to add any detail to Birdwood's general statement. I turned to Thursby and said, "Admiral, what do you think?" He said, "It'll take the best part of 3 days to get that crowd off the beaches." "And where are the Turks?" I asked. "On top of 'em." "Well then," I persisted, "tell me, Admiral, what do you think?" "What do I think? Well, I think myself they will stick it out, if only it is put to them that they must." Without another word, all keeping silence, I wrote Birdwood as follows. "Your news is indeed serious. There is nothing for it but to dig yourselves right in and stick it out. It would take at least 2 days to re-embark you, as Admiral Thursby will explain to you. Meanwhile, the Australian submarine has got up through the Narrows and has torpedoed a gunboat at Ch9. Hunter Weston, despite his heavy losses, will be advancing tomorrow, which should divert pressure from you. Make a personal appeal to your men and Godley's to make a supreme effort to hold their ground. Signed, Ian Hamilton. P.S. You have got through the difficult business. Now you only have to dig until you are safe. Ian H. The deputation made off with this letter, new men carrying a clear order. Be the upshot what it may, I shall never repent that order. Better to die on the enemy's ground than be butchered on the beaches like the runaway Persians at Marathon. De Robeck and Keyes pat me on the back. Will they go on doing so if things go horribly wrong? Midnight decisions taken out of one. Turned in and slept like a top until I was set spinning again at 4 a.m. At dawn the idea of retreat had retreated. The old Queen let fly her first shot at 5:30 a.m. Her shrapnel is a knockout. The explosion of the monstrous shell darkens the rising sun. The bullets cover an acre. The enemy seemed stunned for a while after each discharge. One after the other, Queen Elizabeth took on the Turkish guns along Sari Bair and swept the skyline with them. A message of relief and thankfulness came out to us. Seeing how much they loved us, or rather our long toms, we hung around until 8:30, smothering the enemy guns whenever they dared show their snouts. By that hour, our troops had regained their grip on themselves and also of the enemy. An organised counter-attack on a grand scale was the one thing I had dreaded, and that has not come off. Only a bit of a push over the downland by Gaba Tepe, which was steadied by our enormous shrapnel. We hear there is no change at Helles and Sed El Bahr. Somewhere about 9 a.m., we picked up a wireless from OC Y Beach, which caused us some uneasiness. We are holding the ridge, it said, till the wounded are embarked. Why till? So I told the Admiral that as Birdwood seemed fairly comfortable, we ought to lose no time getting back to Sed El Bahr, taking Y Beach in on our way. At once we steamed south and hove to off Y Beach at 9:30 a.m. There the Sapphire, Dublin and Goliath were lying close inshore, and we could see a trickle of our men coming down the steep cliff and parties being ferried off to the Goliath. The wounded, no doubt, but we did not see a single soul going up the cliff, whereas there were many loose groups hanging about on the beach. I mistrusted these dawdlers by the sea. There was no fighting. A rifle shot now and then from the crests, where we saw our fellows clearly. The little crowd and the boats on the beach were right under them, and no one paid any attention to us or seemed to be in a hurry. Our naval and military signallers were at 6s and 7s. The Goliath wouldn't answer, the Dublin said the force was coming off, and we could not get in touch with the soldiers at all. At about 9:45, the Sapphire asked us to fire over the cliffs into the country, some hundreds of yards farther in, and so the Queen E gave Critier and the south of it a taste of her mettle. Not much use, as the high cliffs hid the intervening hinterland from view, even from the crow's nests. A couple of shrapnel were also fired at the crest line of the cliff, about half a mile farther north, where there appeared to be some snipers. But the trickling down the cliffs continued. No one liked the look of things ashore. Our chaps can hardly be making off in this deliberate way without orders, and yet, if they are making off by order, Hunter Weston ought to have consulted me first, and Birdwood has consulted me last night. The staff are clear against interference, when I have no knowledge of the facts, and I suppose they are right. But to see part of my scheme, from which I had hoped so much, go wrong before my eyes, is maddening. Imagine it. I pressed it through. A second battalion was added to it, and then the South Wales Borderers Company. Many sailors and soldiers, good men, had doubts as to whether the boats could get in, or whether, having done so, men armed and accoutred would be able to scale the yellow cliffs, or whether, having by some miracle climbed, they would not get knocked off with bayonets as they got to the top. I admitted each of these possibilities, but said that taken together they destroyed one another. If the adventure seemed so desperate, even to ourselves, who are desperadoes, then the enemy chief would be of the same opinion, only more so that, supposing we did get up, At least we would find no resistance organized against us. Whether this was agreed to or not, the logic of a C&C has a convincing way of its own. But in all our discussions, one thing was taken for granted. No one doubted that once our troops had got ashore, scaled the heights and dug themselves in, they would be able to hold on. No one doubted, with the British fleet at their backs, they would at least maintain their bridgehead into the enemy's vitals until we could decide what to do with it. At 10:15, we steamed for Cape Helles, whilst I, with anxiety gnawing at me, wrote my first operations cable to K, Lord Kitchener. Thanks to God, who calmed the seas, and to the Royal Navy, who rowed our fellows ashore so coolly as if it were a regatta, thanks also to the dauntless spirit shown by all ranks of both services, we have landed 29,000 upon 6 beaches in the face of desperate resistance from strong Turkish infantry forces well backed by artillery. Enemy are entrenched, line upon line, behind wire entanglements, spread to catch us wherever we might try to concentrate for an advance. Worst danger zone, the open sea, now traversed, but on land not yet out of the wood. Our main covering detachment held up on the water's edge, at foot of amphitheatre of low cliffs around the little bay west of Sed El Bahr. At sunset last night, a dashing attack was made by the 29th Division southwest along the heights from Tekka Burnu to set free the Dublins, Munsters and Hants, but at the hour of writing they are still pinned down on the beach. The Australians have done wonderfully at Gaba Tepe. They got 8,000 ashore to one beach between 3:30 a.m. and 8:30 a.m. due to their courage, organization, sea discipline and steady course of boat practice. Navy report not one word spoken or movement made by any of these thousands of untried troops, either during the transit over the water in the darkness or nearing the land where the bullets took their toll. And as the keel of the boats touched bottom, each boatload dashed into the water and then into the enemy's fire. At first it seemed that nothing could stop them, but by degrees, wire, scrub and cliffs. First, sheer exhaustion broke the back of their impetus, and then the enemy's howitzers and field guns had it all their own way, forcing attack to yield a lot of ground. Things looked anxious for a bit, but by this morning's dawn all are dug in, cool and confident. But for the number and good shooting of Turkish field guns and howitzers, Birdwood would surely have carried the whole main ridge of Sari Bahir. As it is, his troops are holding a long curve upon the crests of the lower ridges, identical to 100 yards with the line planned by my general staff in their instructions and penciled by them upon the map. The French have stormed Kumkali and attacking Yeni Sar. Although you excluded Asia from my operations, have been forced by tactical needs to ask Damad to do this, and so relieve us from artillery fire from the Asiatic shore. Deeply regret to report the death of Brigadier General Napier, and to say that our losses, though not yet estimated, are sure to be very heavy. If only this night passes without misadventures, I propose to attack Achi Baba tomorrow with whatever Hunter Weston can scrape together of the 29th Division. Such an attack should force the enemy to relax their grip on Sed El Bahr. I can look now to the Australians to keep enemy reinforcements from crossing the waist of the peninsula. This was in my original draft. It was slightly condensed for ciphering home in H 1920. Relief from Gaba Tepe is almost swallowed up by the Y Beach fiasco, as we must, I suppose, take it to be. At Helles, things seem much the same as last night. No word from Hunter Weston. Passed Cape Helles at 12:20 p.m. weather now much brighter and warmer. At Y Beach, the re-embarkation of troops is still going on. All quiet, the Goliath says. The enemy was so roughly handled in an attack they made last night that they do not trouble our withdrawal. Too pleased to see us go, it seems. No, this part of our plan has gone clean off the rails. De Robeck agrees that we didn't know enough yet to warrant our intervention, but my orders ought to have been taken before a single fit officer or man was ferried back aboard ship. Never since modern battles were invented by the devil has the commander-in-chief been so accessible to a message from any part of the force. Each theatre has its outfit of signallers, wireless, etc., and I can answer or send help or rush myself upon the scene at 25 miles per hour with the QE's 15 inches in my pocket. Here there is no question of emergency. Whilst having a hurried meal, Jack Churchill rushed down from the crow's nest to say he thought we had carried the fort above Sed al-Bahr. He had seen through a powerful naval glass some figures standing erect and silhouetted against the sky on the parapet. Only, he argued, British soldiers would choose the skyline to stand against during a battle. That is so. On to Gaba Tepe, just in time to see the collapse of the dreaded Turkish counterattack. The Turks have been attacking all the time, but this is, or rather, I can happily now say, was, an organised effort to burst in through our centre. No doubt the panorama was alarming, but we, all of us, we on the QE, felt sure that Australia and New Zealand had pulled themselves together and were going to give socks to Enver and his army. The nightmares of the might-have-beens add brightness to the morning. Imagine had these brave lads entrusted to us by the Commonwealth and the Dominion now penned down upon the beaches, crowding into their boats, while some desperate rearguard was trying to hold the onrush of triumphant Turks. Here come the Turks. First a shower of shells, dropping all along the lower ridges and out over the bay. Very pretty, these shells, at half a mile. Prince of Wales feathers, springing suddenly out of the blue to a loud hammer stroke. Or else the shrapnel, pure white, twisting a moment and pirouetting as children in their nightgowns pirouette, then gliding off the field 2 or 3 together, an aerial ladies' chain. Next, our projectiles. Over the sea they flew, over the heads of our fighters, covered the higher hillsides and skyline with smudges of black, yellow, and green. Smoky fellows these, with a fiery spark at their core, and wherever they touch the earth, rocks leap upwards in columns of dust to the sky. Under so many savage blows, the labouring mountains brought forth Turks. Here and there advancing lines, dots moving over green patches, dots following one another across a broad red scar on the flank of Sari Bahia. Others following, and yet others, and others, and others, closing in, disappearing, reappearing in close waves, converging on the central and highest parts of our position. The tic-tac of machine guns. We've got some guns right up on the precipitous cliff. The noise doubled, redoubled, quadrupled, expanded into one immense tiger-like growl. A solid mass of enemy, crossing the green patch, and then the good Queen Lizzie picked up her targets. Crash! Where are they now? At 4:30 we left Gaba Tepe and sailed for Helles. At 4:50 we were opposite Kritia, passing Y Beach. Troops, wounded, gear have all vanished. Only the petrol tins they took for water shine still, huge diamonds in the evening sun. The enemy let them slip off without a shot fired. The last boatload got aboard the Goliath at 4 p.m, but they had forgotten some of their kit, so the blue jackets rowed ashore as they miked a South Sea pier and brought it off for them. And again, no shot fired. Hove to off Cape Helles at 5:15. Joyous confirmation of Sed el Bahr capture, and our lines run straight across from Aix to Morteau Bay. At 6:20 p.m. started back, intending to see all snug at Gaba Tepe, but picking up some Turkish guns as targets in Kritia on the slopes of Akibaba, we hove to off Cape Teki and opened fire. We soon silenced these guns, though others unseen kept popping. At 6:50 we ceased fire. At 7, Admiral Grey-Pratt came on board and tells us splendid news about Kumkale. At 2 o'clock the artillery fire from shore and ships became too hot for the Turks entrenched in the cemetery, and they put up the white flag and came in as prisoners, 500 of them. 100 more had been taken during the night fighting, but there was treachery, and some of those were killed. Kumkale has been a brilliant bit of work, though I fear we have lost nearly a quarter of our effectives. Grey-Pratt agrees we would do well to hold on for another 24 hours. At 7:15 he took his leave, and we let drop our anchor where we were, off Cape Teki. Now the price has been paid for the first step, and that is the step that counts. Blood, sweat, fire, with those we have forged our master key and forced it into the lock of the Hellespont, rusty and dusty with centuries of disuse. Grant us, O Lord, tenacity to turn it, till through that open door Queen Elizabeth of England sails east for the Golden Horn.
From your